meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So just a quick logistic kind of comment. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of this presentation, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So today, Bob and I will talk about the new 19 CFR Part 111 regulations that went into effect on December 19th of last year. So these regulations are focused on customs brokers, but they also affect importers and especially importers' relationship with customs broker. So our goals today are to introduce the new rules and discuss impact on brokers and on importers. So what do customs brokers have to do differently? Will the new regulations change how brokers and importers interact, and if so, how? My personal goal is also to put your mind at ease if you are concerned about any of the provisions of the new regulations, especially in relations to the relationship between brokers and importers. Despite some controversial provisions that are included in the new regulations, I personally don't see anything that would prevent brokers and importers from continuing to work in partnership and from forming really healthy collaborative relationships that are founded on mutual trust and respect. So it's been a little over a month since the new regulations went into effect. And during that time, National Customs Brokers and Forwarders Association, NCBFIA, and other organizations have been having a continuous dialogue with CBP in order to clarify some of the new provisions and also guidance that was issued by US Customs. So when the original CBP's guidance documents was published, the broker community had concerns about some language that CBP included in the guidance. Even though the guidance document is not legally binding, it still gives us a window into how CBP thinks and how they see certain issues, including enforcement. That's why I think it's really important to understand the guidance, the FAQs issued by CBP, in addition to the new regulations. So today we will talk about how this guidance had changed and discuss some of the clarification. Okay, so now I will pass it on to Bob to begin our discussion of selected provisions of the new regulations.
Okay, thanks, Ania. Let's go to the first page. So this has been the subject of a number of programs. Customs put on some, the National Association put on some. We're going to hit some of the highlights. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty broker stuff. This is directed toward brokers and importers. So the idea is to try to give you a flavor for some of the highlights and some of the issues that affect brokers and importers, right? So the first slide basically is really not earth-shattering. This is a big achievement, but it's a long time in coming. So the national permit has been around for a long time, and Customs at this point decided they're going to do away with the local permits. You used to have a broker in every office because every office required a permit. And now you're not going to require a broker in every office. But by the same token, a brokerage company still needs to exercise responsible supervision and control. So they need to have enough brokers to do the job the right way, right? So from a broker's point of view, they're going to have to figure out how many licensed brokers do we want to employ? Where do we want to employ them? And from the importer's point of view, you're going to want to make sure that you have licensed brokers in every office with which you're working to make sure you get the level of service that you've been getting in the past. I don't know, Ania, do you have comments about this one?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, if you're an importer working with a customs broker, right, the permit structure changes should have no impact on your current business practices. Aside from what Bob was just explaining, this change of the entry filing process itself should be transparent to importers, right? Most customs brokers already had national permits and were able to file entries via CBP's remote location filing program in any port where the broker maybe was not physically located. So that really doesn't change so much, except that now customs brokers will just have one national permit and will be able to file entries at any port, right? Because that RLF program is irrelevant now. It has been retired.
Okay. By the way, these slides are made available at the end. Susan will tell you how to get. Sometimes they ask you to fill out I guess a survey of some kind, but so they'll be available. You don't have to worry about copying what's on the slides. And I think the more interesting discussion will be what's not on the slides anyway. But okay, so this is a quick point, right? This is not new. This is old news. Customs business must be conducted in the United States. I know some brokers, they tend to be larger. They have some of the work done offshore, some done in the United States. This is the general rule. If you're doing things offshore, you may want to make sure there's a ruling on it. Somehow protect yourself so you don't wind up in trouble on this one.
So just a quick reminder here that customs territory, right, of the United States includes all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. So all customs business now must be conducted in the customs territory of the United States. This is, like Bob said, not necessarily new, but it's now codified. And again, you can see the CBP's definition of customs business on the slide. Importers often have questions, right, about what constitutes customs business, and CBP issued many rulings to address some of these questions because it is not really always obvious. But on a high level, any transaction with CBP that concerns the entry and admissibility of the merchandise would be considered customs business, and all such transactions must be conducted in the customs territory of the United States. So here from the importer side, really this does not affect you so much, but you just may want to ask your broker about this and make sure that all customs business that the broker conducts on your behalf is performed in the customs territory of the United States, and the broker is compliant with that requirement.
Okay, so this is something new. There have been a few unfortunate data breaches in the last couple of years, and Customs decided to codify this. For a broker, if you have a data breach, you have to tell Customs about it within 72 hours of discovery of the breach, right? And the regulations are very specific, how they want you to tell them, what they want you to tell them, and so on. One thing is kind of interesting, there's no obligation in here that I can see to tell your clients about it. But I think you want to tell them, I would work under the same 72-hour principle that you're working with the Customs Service.
Yeah, so really not much to add that except that, you know, here the broker is required to notify Customs when there is any compromised importer identification number, right? So something for importers to know. And again, when you talk to your broker and you maybe come up with an SOP with your broker, that could be something to discuss and to make sure that your broker will notify you. I think every good broker would do that, but again, that's something maybe to discuss with your broker. And you know, just quick reminder here, it's not just about specifically about this breach of records, but in general about record keeping. So even though a customs broker is required to keep records of transaction, that does not release importers from their record keeping obligation. This is not new. Importers must keep records of their transactions and make these records available to CBP when requested. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, the clients of mine who don't keep records are not on this call, I can assure you.
Yeah.
Okay, the top part of this is really nothing new. Customs brokers have to keep records, but the bottom part is new. Customs wants to be able to reach out to a representative from the customs broker anytime, day or night, anywhere. And I just don't know what's going to happen. People need to go on vacations. What if you're a broker in Hawaii? You're at quite different time than somebody reaching out to you from customs in New York City and so on. So this is a burden for brokers, and I think customs should work with the national to come up with some pretty good standards here, so it doesn't become onerous.
Yeah, you know, if you look at the CBP's FAQs, it is stated there that CBP requires one point of contact, like Bob said, with sufficient knowledge of broker operation. However, the one point of contact may refer CBP to other individuals to respond to questions. And fortunately, this point of contact may provide like a group email or address or mailbox that could be accessible by others, as long as the mailbox is monitored and response is provided to CBP within a reasonable time. So that is somewhat helpful, but I completely agree with Bob that this is still a problem in that only one name and phone number must be listed with CBP without any backup. So again, what about time differences, vacations, right? This is definitely not an optimal setup.
Okay, again, okay, this one, record keeping. This is again emphasized. Customs wants to make sure that all your records, broker records, are kept in the United States. And it's, you know, in the world we live in today, where everything is electronic and kept in a cloud, you wonder why. If they can have information in a moment's notice, why do they care whether it's kept in a server in New Jersey or in Australia? And I can only think this has to do with enforcement issues. They want to serve a search warrant. They can't do it on a company in Australia. But again, you know, this is going to be a problem. I think brokers want to make sure that they have that their information is kept in a server in the United States.
Yeah, so not much really to add here, but again, something an importer may want to discuss with the broker to make sure that the broker keeps all original records in the United States. And again, that may be a part of your SOP with your broker. It's a good discussion to have. And as far as the requirement for how long to keep records, that hasn't changed. It's still 5 years. And also brokers are required to keep power of attorneys until revoked, right? And after power of attorney is revoked, the broker must retain that POA and a letter of revocation for additional 5 years after the date of revocation or after the client ceases to be active client, whichever is later. So just something to be aware of.
Okay. So this is not really new. Importers' records with a broker have always been held to be confidential and not to be shared. What they did here, they expanded it to make it clear that the information can be requested from other government agencies or by court orders and so on. They made it clear that there's an exception for records that are out there in the public. You know, manifest information, for example, could be out there in the public, and that's something that could be shared. I've seen this come up a number of times as a problem where brokers are working closely with freight forwarders and information is going back and forth. The broker needs to have the right language in their power of attorney to make sure that this confidentiality is waived. If not, the broker is going to have a problem. You can even have that same problem if you have a big company that's got a freight forwarding and a brokerage arm. Again, the confidential information is not to be shared between the two companies unless there is a waiver in the power of attorney.
So yes, nothing to add here, just the fact that brokers can ask their clients, right, to give the broker permission to share records. And again, that would be just an agreement between the broker and the client.
Okay. This one, the top part just basically says brokers need to keep all their records. The bottom part is finally something that's come out and has been much clearer for the first time. It used to be in days gone by, some customs agent would show up in a broker's office and say, I want these files, and expect them to get them immediately. And he or she would be pretty upset if the broker didn't just drop everything and get it. I mean, here they're telling you that you got a 30-day notice, which is fair because that's what you get for requests for information and so on. Of course, that all goes out the window if they show up with a search warrant, but those cases are rare.
So I have nothing to add here.
Okay, so now customs, this has been a problem for brokers for a while. They've made it clear now that customs wants information from a broker for all employees. Before, there was some thought that maybe it was just the employees that were conducting customs business. And now customs said, no, we want it for all employees. If you're a very large brokerage company, that's a problem. Originally, they had a deadline. They pushed it back to February 7th. My understanding is that some of the larger companies are still having a problem meeting this deadline. Customs said, we don't need everything we had before. We just, for example, you don't need prior employment, you don't need prior addresses, but it's still, it's a lot of information to get to customs. They want it on ACE. And by the way, every broker should have an ACE account at this point because a lot of things are happening in ACE. The other thing, again, is to eliminate any kind of vagueness. If you hire somebody new or you terminate employment, again, have to give notice to customs within 30 days. Those are slight changes that have come about.
Yeah, so this requirement, right, to report all employees raised many questions from the broker community, as I don't think that all brokers really reported all employees in the past. And as Bob said, it's all employees. You know, if you look at the FAQs, CBP says that it doesn't matter what kind of duties and responsibilities those employees have and what are their work hours. All employees would have to be reported. So in addition to those who conduct customs business, employees such as warehouse workers, office workers, and also potentially part-time or temporary employees. Well, definitely part-time, but potentially temporary employees would have to be reported. And a broker has also to report employees who live in other countries, for example, Canada and Mexico. So one of the questions that was specifically brought up was about this need to report temporary employees. And this is really interesting. On December 15, during one of their webinars, CBP made the statement that if the broker does not pay the employee directly, but rather the broker pays a temp agency, the broker does not need to report those temporary employees to CBP. However, this has not been confirmed in writing, as far as I know, at least not yet. And despite this comment from CBP, I think that this is still somewhat of a gray area, right? There are binding rulings out there on defining an employee, and some would indicate that a temporary employee is still an employee and should be reported. So NCBFAA is working with CBP on getting a written clarification for this question. So there's more to come on this, probably in the coming days or weeks. What is clear, however, is that if a broker hires independent contractors, these individual contractors would not have to be reported. Bob, am I missing anything here?
No, and it's a good opportunity for brokers to have different companies for different services.
Yeah.
Just so that they don't have to go through all that reporting requirement. Okay, this is a big change in the regulation that has created a fair amount of heartburn for customs brokers, right? So I'm going to read the exact language, right? The broker must execute customs power of attorney directly with the importer of record or drawback claimant, and not via a foreign, a freight forwarder or other third party to transact customs business for that person. So, okay, when they say directly, it was pretty unclear, right? So what did it mean? What if you got the power of attorney through a freight forwarder, but it came from an importer? You know, you could think of lots of variations here that could have resulted in the broker getting the power of attorney. So they've clarified that recently. By the way, we have a citation to it a little bit later on, but there's one of those messages. What is it? CSMS messages? Ania?
CMS messages, yes.
Right, which takes you to a customs website, which has specific instructions on this particular point. And basically what they say, well, first of all, they've extended this. It's not the effective date of the regulation. you can get this done by February 17th. And I mean, my sense is customs not going to run out on February 17th and start looking at this issue. It's going to take it a while, but you can be sure it will show up in the auditor protocol. So the current word is if the power of attorney was signed by a third party. More often than not, it's going to be a freight forwarder, but it could be an agent. Then that power of attorney needs to be replaced. If it came through a third party, right, as opposed to directly from the importer, then customs is giving you the option to basically verify that your relationship exists. You're dealing directly with the broker and so on. So now I say here, brokers need a plan to review. Brokers could have hundreds, if not thousands, of powers of attorney. I don't think they're going to sit down and go through all of them. My suggestion would be, and I'm not in the brokerage business, you have to tell me if this is totally not workable or whatever, but my suggestion would be to start with those situations where you're billing the client through the freight forwarder. Because when auditors come in, that's what they look for, right? So if that's the case, you might have gotten the power of attorney from the freight forwarder or through the freight forwarder. Of course, I mean, if you have the opportunity and you know who these people are, you can go through all your powers of attorney. I don't know what advice you have on that, Ania.
Well, first of all, going forward, as you said, brokers can only accept a new power of attorney directly from the client, from importer, right? So if as an importer, if you're used to deal with a broker through a third party, just expect that the broker will probably come to you directly, or there will have to be some kind of direct contact and establishment of this business relationship, right? Like you said, all of those power of attorneys that were maybe signed by a third party, not licensed third party, will not be valid anymore. So they have to be replaced. And I think your suggestion on how to start working on that replacement is probably a good one. Now, with as far as the POA that was obtained through a third party, but signed by the importer, but the broker does not have a copy of direct communication with the importer, I think this is still kind of somewhat in a gray area. The broker may need to establish some kind of contact, but I think the power of attorney is still valid, right? If it was signed by importer, so that should not really constitute a huge problem. But that direct contact, whether it's an email or some kind of communication, will have to be established.
When you think about it, each of these powers of attorney, even if they're signed by an agent, are valid powers of attorney.
Right.
And that's all that customs required for a broker to do business in the name of an importer. I don't think it's fair to ask them to go back and replace those documents.
Well,
because
yeah.
This is a new standard. Doesn't seem right to me.
But basically, they say that if it's signed by a forwarder, it's no longer valid, right? According to the new regulations, and it just doesn't go forward, right? It goes backward too, and you have to replace those. So right. A heavy lift, I think, for some brokers.
Some people do a lot of business with freight forwarders, a lot.
But I know also many brokers have policies in place. I know we do that. We never did it that way, right? All of our power of attorneys were signed by importers, but at the same time, some brokers may have had other practices. There was nothing wrong with that in the past.
True.
So,
true.
So yeah, definitely a tough one. In addition, I wanted to mention one thing here. This kind of seems obvious, but it may not be. So there cannot be agreement with a third party which prohibits direct communication between the customs house broker and the importer. That's now codified in the regulations, and it's important to know, right? Again, if you're used to be dealing with your broker or with your importer through a third party, now you have to be able to contact the client directly. Bob, anything else on this?
No.
we're going to move on to even more fun right now.
Yeah, this is, and we're starting to get into some serious stuff. So, okay, so this particular regulation, I think, has caused more grief on the part of the brokerage community than anything else. I don't think this is the worst one. The worst one's coming up right after this. Okay, so we have this one. So the top part of it is old news, right? Basically says a broker can't file any entry or make any claim or be involved in anything that they know to be wrong. Very simple, and that's how everybody conducts their business. But here's what's new. And again, I want to read the exact language, right? Broker must also document and report to CBP when the broker separates from or cancels representation of a client as a result of determining the client is intentionally attempting to use the broker to defraud the U.S. government or commit any criminal act against the U.S. government. The report to CBP must include the client name, date of separation or cancellation, and reason for the separation or cancellation. So that's like brokers are saying, wow, now I'm a junior G-man. I'm out there looking for fraud and turning in my clients. And that's bad for broker-client relations. It's bad for business. But okay, so I think it's important that we look at the elements here. Before I get to that, I want to say, in the Federal Register notice, the way this works is, Customs will have a proposal, then they'll review the comments. Usually they say, we read these comments and we don't agree, right? And here's the final rule, okay? So Customs said in those notices, they do not expect a lot of notifications as a result of this change. They don't. But brokers are very concerned about it, and we'll talk about why. But first, let's talk about the elements of this. First of all, we're talking about there has to be a relationship with a broker, right? Then the broker has to terminate or separate from that relationship. And then it has to be severed for a particular reason. The reason is that this client, because it's not just the importer record. You see, they have drawback claimant. It could be anybody that's working with a customs broker, was trying to use the customs broker in a fraud scheme. So we're not talking about a disagreement, right, between a broker and an importer. There certainly are plenty of those, and it's not fraud, and it's not involved. The broker's not being involved in fraud. You can still have these discussions back and forth. There has to be a termination of a relationship. And let's just first go to the definition of fraud, which I get from the customs regulations, okay? It's a material misstatement, omission, or act in connection with the transaction, and it was committed or omitted knowingly, i.e. was done voluntarily and intentionally as established by clear and convincing evidence. So it's usually an intentional misstatement or omission that's done to try to get some kind of favorable advantage that they wouldn't get otherwise, right? And it's got to be really bad. Ania has a number of examples to go through because Customs has given in their guidance, again, a number of opportunities that they say constitute fraud.
Yeah, so thank you, Bob. So I'll get to this in a second. I just wanted to say that, as you can imagine, this is a controversial provision that raised a lot of questions and protests from the broker community, right? Many brokers and importers and other clients have been concerned about this reporting requirement. And when the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking for Part 111 was originally issued, many brokers were concerned. They were worried that importers could have concerns about working with brokers and worrying about being turned in by the brokers if a broker thought that the importer was doing something wrong, or a client, right? So again, broker organizations ask CBP to remove or at least soften this language in the final regulations, but it did not happen. However, as Bob said, I think the regulations are very clear, right? First, the broker has to discontinue relationship with the client, and for the specific reason, right? The relationship needs to be discontinued because the client is intentionally trying to defraud the government or commit any other criminal act while using the broker. So I think this is really important to remember, right? I think these will be very rare occurrences. Now, what could be some examples of fraud? Actually, I'm going a little too far here. Let me just go back. So let's think about an importer who, or a client who designed an illegal scheme where he uses two invoices. There's one actual invoice to pay his vendor or manufacturer, and there is another invoice for a lower amount to submit to CBP in order to avoid or lessen customs duty, right? This is an obvious example of illegal fraudulent activity directed at defrauding the US government. And there are actual examples of this type of fraud. In 2019, a children's apparel company and the CEO were charged in customs fraud because the CEO was said to submit double invoices to CBP, an invoice that falsely, the one that was submitted to CBP understated the true value of the good, right? Another famous case was the Trek leather in 2009. That one was for knowingly and intentionally not adding the value of assist to the dutiable value of imported merchandise. We can think about a lot of examples when someone would intentionally avoid duties such as anti-dumping or 301. So let's say if the importer comes to his broker and says, I want to avoid paying 301 duties, and I'm going to change the classification to one that is not subject to 301 duties or to a different country of origin, even though I know that the classification is not correct, this may indicate that the importer has an intention, right, to defraud the government. And the broker should explain that it's wrong to the importer. And if the importer insists on submitting the obviously wrong classification with the sole purpose of avoiding duties, I can tell you that no good broker would support it, right? The broker would discontinue the relationship, and because of the new regulations now, the broker would need to report this relationship discontinuation to CBP. Now, I think Bob mentioned it very briefly, the fact that we're not talking about mistakes, right? Because on the other hand, and not just mistakes, even disagreements, sometimes brokers disagree with their clients. Not everything in international trade is black and white. Classification, for example, can be very complex, right? So if we disagree like normal people do, that's not fraud, right? That would not fall under the situation. And if the classification is reasonably justifiable, that does not constitute fraud, even if the classification turns out to be incorrect. So really important distinction, right, to make here. So again, I think from my perspective, there should be no concerns about not being able to trust your broker regarding compliance questions you may have or classification questions. This new provision doesn't change how brokers work with the clients, and brokers should continue answering compliance-related questions, offering their consulting services, and they would not have to report, right, any of these compliance conversations to CBP unless and until someone is planning to, again, intentionally break the law and to use the broker to accomplish that. But again, any responsible broker would discontinue relationship with such a client in such circumstances anyway. So in summary, this reporting requirement does not relate to any minor issues or misunderstandings or clerical errors. Fraud is pretty extreme. The concept of willful and knowing and intentional, those concepts are very important here, really critical points. The broker will not turn the importer in unless the importer is kind of caught red-handed trying to intentionally defraud the government. And also keep in mind, brokers are not investigators, right? a broker would truly rarely know if his customer is doing something fraudulent, unless the importer would actually come to the broker and tell the broker. So again, and Bob kind of touched on this, but I want to mention this here because these occurrences will be very rare. Many importers struggle to keep up with reasonable care requirements, have questions about classification, FTA applicability, anti-dumping. But again, that does not mean that they are planning to commit fraud. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the CBP's guidance document, right? And make you aware of how CBP looks at the broker's separation from the client. So one thing to note here is that originally CBP provided some concerning examples in the customs broker guidance document. And again, many organizations, including NCBFA, requested additional clarification on those comments included in the guidance. And CBP, I must say, heard the industry's concern and has since modified the guidance to make it clear that, again, there has to be intent behind the reportable offenses. So, for example, again, if an importer makes a mistake with classification and because of that pays less duty to CBP that is due, this would not be in itself a reportable offense, right? The importer needs to correct the issue once discovered, use the correct classification and pay correct duties going forward, and may want to consider filing a prior disclosure, but the broker is not required to report this issue to customs. However, the broker is required to document advice provided to importers on corrective action that importers should take. So we'll talk about this one more shortly. But in the guidance document, what you can see on the slide, CBP provided examples of those reportable offenses and the conduct which may cause a broker to separate from the client. So here are some of the examples, right? Providing any intentionally false or fraudulent statement, information, or documents to CBP to obtain an improper duty rate or duty refund, intentionally declaring false country of origin in order to avoid anti-dumping or countervailing duties, or to import restricted or prohibited merchandise into the United States. Any activity that is intentionally meant to deprive the government of duties, taxes, fees, such as undervaluing or misclassifying imported goods. And I mentioned the assists right before with the Trek leather case. That was an example of undervaluing the goods. Any evidence of intentional forced labor violations, such as fraudulently misrepresenting the manufacturing process or shipping documents. Forced labor is a huge focus area for CBP right now, and I think it will become even more important. Refusing to identify and declare the anti-dumping and countervailing duty order which the broker advised is applicable to the listed merchandise. So brokers often notify clients that their merchandise may be flags for anti-dumping, and importers should take those very, very seriously. Some more, there's evidence of intentional illegal importation of any prohibited or restricted merchandise, such as IPR issues, right? Counterfeit, fake goods, or other controlled or unlawful substances. And then merchandise which threatens the health and safety of consumers, and the financial crimes such as money laundering, cyber crimes, and things like that. So these are just examples. And again, as you contemplate this list, it's worth noting that these are important to CBP, right? And it is your responsibility as an importer to demonstrate reasonable care when you submit any of this information to US Customs. So I guess if you have any gaps in your compliance programs, now would be time to address them. But the bottom line is that there's really nothing to fear. I think that this is my opinion here. If you're an importer and have any concerns, you should feel comfortable to call your broker, to discuss your questions, to discuss your concerns. For any importer who has legitimate questions about what is right, it is okay to ask these questions and to partner with your broker to get answers, and also to implement appropriate compliance measure. it is not fraud, right, to ask compliance questions. Now, if you suspect more serious issues or a criminal activity within your organization, then we would strongly recommend hiring a customs attorney. Working with a customs attorney gives you the protection of attorney-client privilege. This is something that a customs broker or consultant can't offer. Right, so now, Bob, do you have anything to add here, or can we move on?
To that. Let's go back to the last slide.
Okay.
And I have a couple of other points. First of all, it's interesting to see, and Customs makes a point of this in the Federal Register notice, that some of these things are beyond the normal customs issues that we see. Cyber crimes, financial crimes, money laundering, those kinds of things. And how they expect a broker to come on this kind of information is beyond me. But anyway, so any kind of crime, they want the broker to comment on if he's separating from the importer. We've done some work with clients that are importing antiquities and so on, and I'll tell you, that's a very difficult area. I wouldn't want to be in a position of having to figure out what's a crime or not a crime in that case. But this issue, the first thing you have to figure out is, when is a relationship with a broker start, right? New client comes to you, and maybe the first thing you do is get a power of attorney. And then you're going to do your due diligence, and you'll start to look at them in terms of what their classifications are, how they value, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the point where the client is saying to the broker, I need you to enter this under this duty-free provision. And the broker knows that that's baloney. And the broker says to this potential client, we can't do that. That's wrong. That's like really wrong. The broker says, okay, I'm going somewhere else. Okay. Or my other broker does. No, I don't care. This is like really wrong. I can't justify this. Doesn't pass the red face test. So now the question is, did the broker have a relationship? You haven't filed one entry for this person. I think the answer is no, but I think that's something that should get fleshed out. I think you need to conduct customs business with them before a termination would result in your obligation to have to turn this person in. Okay. The other thing is, customs is very specific as to the number of ways that a broker can do this filing, right? You can do e-filing, you can call a C, you can do all these different kinds of things. But customs hasn't told the broker whether they would keep that information confidential or not. I think brokers are concerned that if they turn somebody in and they're wrong, that they're going to get sued. Again, question of liability is a concerning thing. I expect the national will be addressing these things over time. I think those are my additional points for this.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Okay, this is the one I think that's even worse than 11132. Okay, the first part of this is, again, old news, right? The new news says it starts in the middle. It's the last sentence. The broker must advise the client on the proper corrective actions required and retain a record of the broker's communication with the client, right? So the first part said a broker can't file anything that's wrong, right? So, but now we know that in this relationship, from time to time, a broker will identify or a client will identify a problem with an entry. Well, the broker is definitely going to fix it going forward, because if the broker can't fix it, broker's not going to file those entries, right? Now, and the broker's called upon probably every day to give advice to their clients. What do I do about this? What do I do about that? And now the broker has to record it. I don't know if that has been brokers' habit, in the past, but now they have to report it. And If I was
Well, not reported, just documented, right, in their files.
recorded, it was close. Recorded. You're
Right.
not reporting. Yes, yes.
We're not reporting that. Yeah.
You're not reporting anything. There's nothing to report.
Exactly.
Only again, if it's fraud and you separate as a result of it. But again, you're recording it. If the customs service goes to a broker because they're conducting an investigation or otherwise, they'll say, give me all your files, including any communication, and customs can get that document, right? But if you're opening your heart or your soul up to a lawyer, then you're covered with attorney-client privilege. So there, it does, in a way, kind of brokers need to record these things to protect themselves, right? Because if customs comes knocking, they have to say, oh yeah, we had this, right? Now, what kind of advice is a broker going to give? Well, we have to fix this going forward. And then what about the past? Well, I mean, if somebody comes to me, we've identified a problem. For the past, it's up to them. Do they want to make a prior disclosure, or do they want to take their chances? And many brokers do prior disclosures. Some of them refer them out to customs attorneys or consultants. You know, but this is, I think, a continuing issue. Again, importers may want to know what's in their broker's files. Brokers should be careful about what they write down, but now they have to write down everything that occurred. What do you have on this one?
Well, and my take on this is probably just slightly different than Bob's. You know, we are used to giving clients advice, and I think that the thing here is that we tend to document that advice that we give to a client, and I think that can actually protect both the broker and the importer, because it could be a demonstration of reasonable care on the part of the importer, right? If CBP questions the importer's transaction too. So I think an important part is to share that documentation with the client, not just keep it somewhere tucked into, you know, your files, right? If you give advice to the client, share this advice in writing with your client. And I think this is important. It can also, on the other hand, in my mind, protect the client, because the client can say, hey, I went to an expert, I asked about classification, this is what they gave me, I trust this opinion, and you know, and that's kind of how I demonstrate reasonable care. So I think what will be really more important than ever now for importers is to make sure that they correct compliance issues, right, that brokers bring to their attention. And as I mentioned, you know, we talked about prior disclosure, and I think Bob even mentioned that it's optional, right? It's never mandatory. But it will be important to really correct the discovered issue going forward. I think it will be a must, because I think in those situations, right, if we document this and tell our client, hey, you need to correct this issue, and the client doesn't, then that can be really a problem, right? So brokers cannot knowingly submit incorrect information to CBP. So this may end up in broken relationship between brokers and importers, and broker may not be able to work with the importers. So I think this will be really important going forward.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point, because sometimes clients wind up with penalties, 1592 penalties, and we're able to say that they consulted an expert, which was their customs broker.
Right.
They gave them all the facts, and this was the advice that they gave them, and so on. So that's definitely a mitigating factor in the penalty case.
Okay, so the last topic, responsible supervision and control.
Okay, so again, we talked before about having the right number of brokers to be able to exercise responsible supervision and control. Customs did something a little unusual here. They brought a penalty case against UPS, and they lost the case. They lost the case because before, the regulation said, before we determine if we're going to issue a penalty against the broker, we're going to look at these 10 factors. And UPS was able to convince the court that customs didn't look at all 10 factors. So therefore, customs hadn't done its job. So now what they've done is, well, first of all, they've added 3 more factors, which are on another slide, right? And now they say, we can look at these 13 factors. We can look at some of them, or we can look at none of them, or we can look at others. So they have total discretion. They've given themselves total discretion to determine whether a broker exercises responsible supervision and control, right? Can we just skip ahead for a minute?
Yep.
Go to this. Yeah, these are the 3. Hold on a second. I'm running low here. Hold on.
Oh.
Okay, so these are the 13 factors. The last 3 are new ones, right? Right. So let's go back. I'll just go through the new ones a little bit. Kind of messing you up here. Yeah. Okay. Timeliness.
Okay. This one. Okay.
Timeliness in processing entries, communications between CBP and the broker, communications between the broker and its officers. I notice there's nothing there about communications between the brokers and the clients, but you know, who am I to make up these rules? But what's important is, we go back just one more slide, Ania. I'm sorry to keep jumping around on you. Okay, so I cited here this CSMS message, which is a link to the customs website on these new regulations. That's a great document because they go through each of these 13 factors and they give you ideas of things that you can do, Mr. Customs Broker, Miss Customs Broker, right? That you can do to exercise responsible supervision and control. So, and now, if a broker is applying for a national permit now, they have to provide a plan that says this is how we're going to exercise responsible supervision and control. Customs is not asking brokers who currently have the national permit to go back and make a plan, but they say it's good, it's best business practice. My prediction is that over time, customs will require brokers to have it. When they do audits, they're going to want to see what their plan is to exercise responsible supervision and control. We see it with importers all the time. What are your written SOP? You know, what do you do when you get a check? What do you do when you file an entry? And so on. They want to see that written, and they'll want to see it for brokers too. So every broker should, I think, look at this link at this page, right? Give you an idea. If you don't have a written instructions and things down, then you should get them and have a practice. Let me just see what else there is in this subject. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think that's all I have in this subject. I don't know what else you have.
Yeah, so just to add a couple things as far as the relationship between importers and brokers. So obviously all these factors are critical for the customs broker to understand and to put together the plan, as Bob said. But I think it's also important for importers to understand what the CBP's requirements of brokers are, right? And this is something you can use in your conversations with potential brokers, right? Brokers you want to consider to handle your transactions, also in RFPs, right? But I think some like important factors to highlight when importers talk to the brokers are training, right? Training that broker provides to employees and internal procedures, including any instructions and guidance that are provided to employees. For brokers' clients, right, for importers, it is important to assure that your entries are handled by qualified trained personnel, and that the broker requires their employees to follow compliance procedures and process. So that's a good topic of conversation, especially when you consider to hire a new broker, right? Whether the broker audits entries and processes entries and submits payments to CBP in a timely manner, very, very important, right, to importers. How many licensed customs broker does the broker employ? So with the new regulations, right now, CBP requires a broker to employ a sufficient number of licensed customs brokers. CBP does not prescribe, does not specify what the sufficient number is, but CBP expects that employees will have easy access to licensed customs brokers when they have questions, when they run into issues, and that the broker assures right appropriate level of supervision depending on the complexity of the entries, the size of entries, and in general, right, the size of the broker's business, how many clients they have. So these are really, I think, things to highlight and for importers to discuss with their brokers or maybe with their prospective brokers. And one last thing I wanted to mention, so obviously importers can be penalized, right, if they don't demonstrate reasonable care and submit incorrect information to customs, but brokers can also be penalized for non-compliance with these requirements, right? And CBP's response to a broker violation would depend upon whether it is egregious, flagrant, or non-egregious. And in the case of non-egregious violations, CBP said that they will first attempt to actually work with the broker through the informed compliance process to improve the broker's performance. And they said that penalty will only be assessed if those non-punitive approaches fail to produce satisfactory corrective action. So that's something to keep in mind. And we will be watching this too. Hopefully that's actually what will be happening. But I think the point here to just kind of close with is that a good broker will have a plan and will have solid policies and procedures and will abide by these responsible supervision and control requirements. So again, when you consider hiring a new broker, you should be knowledgeable about those requirements and have a discussion with your prospective broker. Bob, anything else?
Yeah, I have just one thing on that. Because we've seen, from time to time, clients come to us, they want import manuals. The same thing for customs brokers. One thing you don't want to do is create a manual with lots of steps in it that you don't follow, because that will create a problem for you. You're almost better off with no manual than listing 100 things and you don't follow any of them, because
right.
auditors will burn you on those. Say, well, it says here you're going to do this and you didn't do it, and it'll be in all the reports. You will pay dearly for it. I think we've hit the highlights of the new. We didn't cover changes to the licensing exams, to the fees, to all that other stuff. We try to hit the high points here.
So, Bob, we have a couple of questions in the chat. I can just read them quickly. So the first one, I think I just pretty much addressed, but the number of needed licenses is not outlined within the update by customs. They are leaving it to the broker to decide. Would this become an issue if a broker is audited? Is one broker per office enough?
So if you let's go back to the way things were, right? And you have to. This is a common sense issue. But again, I think there'll be more guidance as they go down the road. But all right, if you're a small brokerage company, you have one office, you have 6 employees, you have one licensed broker, I think you're fine. You have 3 offices, you have a licensed broker in each office, you're fine, right? But if you're a large broker, you got 100 people conducting customs business in one office, I don't think one licensed broker is enough. I don't think, because that person's supposed to supervise 100 people. I think it's not going to happen. So again, customs is hedging it. It's going to depend on the size of your business. Again, do you have 100 different industries, or you have one industry with 100 entries? All those things will make a difference on this issue.
Yeah, I think it's your ability to build the case to say I have 20 licensed customs brokers, and that's how they supervise all of the work that's happening as far as customs business, right?
You need a
Um,
plan for receiving documents, filing entries, auditing the results, communicating with customs and with clients and so on.
Okay, so the other one I think is about whether, so it says all employees of the entity of the filer must be reported, like accounting, drivers, non-entry filers. I think it's a question whether all employees of the entity have to be reported, and yes, the answer is yes. Drivers, non-entry filers, accounting, anyone.
I think customs has been asked that question many times because you can see it from the other side. Why do you care who's in a warehouse? And customs view is, look, they're handling merchandise. You have responsibility as a broker. We want to know who everybody is. Make sure you're not engaging nefarious characters in your company.
Okay, one more question regarding the responsible supervision and control plan. How does it apply? Would it be constructed if the CHB is operating as an individual and not party of an agency?
I don't quite understand the question.
So it's
If you
like individual customs broker, I
if
guess,
you're an individual customs broker, not a corporation, and you're obviously a licensed customs broker, you still need procedures, right? You still should have written procedures. It's not going to involve managing people who work for you, who do the work. But you know what? An individual customs broker, they may have employees as well, right?
Right.
So again, it depends on how extensive the business is and what type of business it is. But that person should, again, also have some kind of written standard procedures.
Okay, these are all questions we've had.
Okay, I think we're good.
All right. Does anyone have any other questions or? No.
We stumped.
There's one more.
What does it say?
Going back to the question of needing to know the warehouse workers, etc., but not a temp employee. Well, again, this is, I think there is more guidance that will hopefully come out of NCBFAA because they're still waiting for customs to confirm answer to this question. Because like I said, at this point, I think this is still a gray area, even though customs mentioned that temp employees would not have to be reported as long as the customs broker does not pay the employee directly, but there's no written guidance on that, no written confirmation. So I think it would be safe to wait for that written confirmation. But like I said, there are also a lot of rulings, and part of this is determination whether there is a bona fide relationship between the employee and the customs broker, and there are definitions in those binding rulings that actually explain that.
Yeah, customs feels that if a broker has an employee, the broker has control over the employee and wants them to be responsible for their guidance. I don't know why they let temporary employees out of that loop. Seems to me if you hire a temporary agency and they have people working for you, you still want them to make sure that they're exercising responsible supervision and control. But these are customs distinctions, not mine.
Okay, I think these are all the questions that we had.
Okay.
Susan, I know you had some closing comments.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you to both of you. That was very thorough presentation. I will be sending out the presentations to all the registered attendees probably tomorrow. And if you registered to get the CCS or CES credit, I will also send you that code as well. And other than that, keep an eye out for the Trade and Transportation Conference coming up April 11th through 13th in Newport, Rhode Island. There'll actually be a CTV trade day there with various government agencies. So it could be of interest to many of you. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the Connect office, or Bob and Ania have graciously also offered their email addresses at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to follow up. And thank you to our sponsors, Acutive Solutions, AN Deringer, and GDLSK. So thanks to the sponsors for helping make this happen. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank
Susan.
you.
Thanks,
Hopefully it
everyone.
won't snow too
Have a
much.
great afternoon. Bye-bye.